Alright, welcome to our lecture talking about deindustrialization and the rise of services. And the slides themselves were designed to accompany the book People, Places, and Culture, and I did make some modest adjustments to them, nothing too major. I am, of course, Miss Gall, and I'll be your lecturer for the day. So, we talk about how deindustrialization and the rise of the service economy alter production. We want to make sure we go back and review and do a little bit of talking about definitions and things like that. So, tertiary industries, service industries, right, encompass the range of services that are found in modern societies. And this is literally everything from the person who checked you out at the grocery store to the CEO of Google. Okay, so just a huge range. So a lot of economic geographers and a lot of economists go ahead and split that up just a little bit. And so they take out information services, information and capital services, right? And they call those quaternary. And then quinary are the activities that facilitate complex decision making and the advancement of human capacity. Think research and development, think CEOs and things like that. Okay, sorry, research and development wouldn't be under quinary, it'd be under quaternary. But think, for instance, people who facilitate large-scale economic operations, like CEOs and the like. So, when we're talking about the United States, we're going to spend most of our time talking about the United States because it's a great example. Okay. Deindustrialization itself does little to nothing to change the basic disparities that we see, the basic differences between the core and the periphery that have long characterized the global economy. Okay, so when we talk about deindustrialized areas, we want to start with and talk about the industrial zone of the northeastern United States, right around the Great Lakes, okay, which is an area used to be an area of heavy industry, steel, auto manufacturing, and like, and some of that's still there, but a lot of it has since moved away. Okay, and as it moved away, it left behind empty shells of factories and rusting equipment, things like that, and that's why we call it the Rust Belt. So we've got this kind of rust belt that stretches along the Great Lakes, and a lot of that industry, not all of it, but a reasonable chunk of it has moved down south to what we call the Sun Belt, right, which is largely the southeastern United States, and it's grown up as kind of the secondary industrial region that's successfully transitioned into a service economy pretty successfully, right, and the Rust Belt has really struggled with that transition. Okay, and then the other thing we want to talk about, so we talked a little bit about the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, right, and kind of where we find some of these new economic activities. But what we haven't really talked about is how companies decide where they want to locate, right? So technologies like GIS can help model the best locations for new businesses, office complex, government centers, transportation connections, right, for those infrastructure-related ideas. They can absolutely help with businesses and things like that, but GIS a lot of times is best at where we're going to put infrastructure, right? Major retailers can change the economic prospects and physical landscapes of places where their headquarters are located, but also where their stores are located, right? So, for example, Walmart is their headquarters is in Arkansas, and it's really changed the landscape and the culture in a small town in Arkansas, and I'm drawing a total blank on the name right now, where Walmart's headquarters is. But Walmart can be very divisive because it also changes the physical landscape, the cultural landscape of areas that they move into. So a lot of times you see protest movements and things like that surrounding Walmart wanting to come into a community, right? And so that's just kind of your basic retail service. And if we're talking about quaternary services, the locational influences are a lot more diverse, right? Because really, to a large degree, they can be located almost anywhere. And so it just depends on what the infrastructure is, what are the resources available, what human capital is available, and things like that. The quaternary sector tends to be concentrated around capital cities, right? So seats of government, universities, areas where there's corporate headquarters and the like. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it, because it's those high-level decision-making influencing whole countries or whole economies and things like that. Okay. Along with this quinary and quaternary, what we see is the development of clusters, and in particular high technology clusters, right? So the whole goal of this is to develop an area in such a way, like for instance the Silicon Valley in California, which is a technopole, right? It's an area that is planned and built for high technology and agglomeration, and it's what allows companies to work together to increase their output, to share resources and things like that, right? So it allows them to work together to become even greater than any one of them might be on their own, right? And high technology industries have become hugely important in terms, symbolically, for what are called post-industrial worlds, right? Think the United States, where we don't have a ton of heavy industry. Most people who make good money tend to go into technology. Okay. And so local, regional, and national governments tend to aggressively pursue firms in the sector. New York City, for instance, a few years ago, decided it was going to go after high technology sector and try to become a technopole. And so they, what they did was went in and put in Mayor Bloomberg put in a whole bunch of high-speed wiring and started creating some tax breaks and things like that to try and attract these companies to the area. And the whole goal is to create what's called a growth pole, which is to say something that spurs economic development in the surrounding area. So it's not just the one industry, but it really kind of rolls out into those secondary industries as well. Okay, so tourism is a huge piece of this as well, because tourism at the end of the day is kind of the ultimate service industry, right? That's what it's all built around, is serving people. And tourism isn't really a thing until the global core has free time and free money to spend. And so then at the end of the day, what ends up happening is people decide they have enough stuff, they want experiences, not stuff, and so they start traveling to different places to check them out, right? Tourism continues to expand, and to expand into new areas and new parts of the world, even though there's a dip at the beginning and end of the first decade of the 21st century. So think really right around 2000 and 2010, there's some dips there, which kind of makes sense when you stop and think about what's going on economically, right? And those are time periods where there's economic downturns, and especially in the aftermath of 2008 and the global economic depression that occurred, right? Economic impacts of tourist-related development are hugely far-reaching. It can basically turn an area around, right, in terms of the government having more money and things like that, but it creates a lot of jobs that are low-paying, that aren't necessarily very secure. Most of the major tourism-related companies are not based in the country in which they're offering their tours, and so, yeah, they're paying taxes and things like that. They're building hotels and helping build roads and things like that, but they're also, the bulk of the money is actually leaving the country. So it really is kind of a double-edged sword, or leaving the area, I should say. Okay, so, and when we talk about tourism, by the way, we're literally talking about everything from, say, since we're here in Western Washington, going up to Leavenworth to see the snow and the holiday lights is tourism, right? To, going over to, say, Australia in the middle of the winter just to be able to experience the beaches or see the Sydney Opera House, right? Or scuba dive in the Great Coral Reef, okay, things like that. So, and everything in between, you know, it's the cruise up to Alaska, or it's the road trip that you take to visit Disneyland. That's all tourism and related services. In service economies, though, there's a lot of place vulnerability that occurs, right? First of all, because mechanization can have a hugely negative impact on service jobs. And it's those low-end service jobs that can be some of the highest impacted, right? as well as, in some ways, some of those higher-end service jobs. Places dominated by service sectors require extensive connections with other places because they're not producing a ton of their own food or their own material products, right? So in Seattle, for instance, which is just north of where we're at, Seattle doesn't grow its own food, right? Seattle doesn't make its own clothes. Seattle doesn't make its own concrete or its own cars. So it requires connections to other places to provide those things that it needs. And along with this, economic decision-making in the globalized economy is very disconnected from the fate of individual places. And this is one of the huge debates with globalization, is the fact that companies don't really have a stake in location, right? If Boeing, for example, suddenly decides that it no longer likes Washington State, I don't know, maybe the government does something stupid and gets Boeing mad at it, right? They start taxing, at 80% all profits or something crazy like that. Boeing's not necessarily tied here. They could pick up and move somewhere else pretty easily, right? So what you see is there becomes this worry that places, because they're competing, that it's going to be essentially a race to the bottom, and that standards and expectations and taxes for companies and the like are actually going to get lower and lower and lower as places are trying to attract various industries, right? And I mean, great examples of this are like financial services. You locate financial services anywhere in the world, right? There are certain areas that are better known for it where there's agglomerations, right? New York City, Tokyo, London, Hong Kong. These are major financial services hubs. They don't have to be, right? That's actually something that, you could set up a major financial services company in Fargo, North Dakota, if the conditions were right. So there is nothing that says those companies have to be in that place, other than the fact that other companies are there and that knowledge and things like that are there. But if something were to change, they could pick up very easily and move to another place. So that's been our lecture talk a little bit about deindustrialization and the growth of the service economy and the effects that it has. We talked about what is the service economy. We talked about Rust Belt areas. We talked about the Sun Belt area. We also talked about tourism and related services. And we talked about a little bit about how companies can decide where to locate and what that means, right? As well as talking about the rise of information services and what that really can mean for an area. So if you have any questions, please, by all means, feel free to come see me and ask them during class, and I'd be delighted to hear what you have to say.